Hey, my name is Kim. Welcome back to my channel. Today I have another Media Monday episode for you, and of course we are breaking down Yellow Jackets Season 2, Episode 3, Digestif. This was such a great episode. It was a little slower paced than the other two, but honestly, it was, when I went back and rewatched it, it was so rich. I ended up, so I take notes for these episodes, and I filled six pages, 3 pages front to back. Made me think of Ross there, 18 pages front and back. But yes, I have a lot to talk about today. All right, so the episode opens with Coach Ben flashing back to memories of Paul and what could have been. So we see that Paul wanted him to move in with him, which we know was mentioned in season 1. He told Natalie that. But it would have involved Ben quitting the team, and he wouldn't have been able to go to nationals with the girls. And so he more or less chose them over Paul, chose work over his personal life. But not just that, he wasn't ready to come out of the closet and live life as his true self at this point. We also have this awesome quote: "What kind of asshole puts cumin in a clam chowder? Like, I need this on an apron ASAP." We then see Natalie sitting staring at Jackie's remains. They're still on the pier, but they are stripped down to the bones. Even her fingers are just bones. It is wool. And Ty comes out and she says, what happened to her? She is assuming that an animal ate Jackie at this point. And Van's like, what are you talking about? We ate her, and you ate her face. And Ty throws up. She's super upset, screaming. So it confirms what I thought last week, that she was in her fugue state at the time of the feast. Nat, at that point, suggests taking Jackie's bones, leaving them in the plane, and then in the spring, when the ground is thawed, they will bury her with the rest of the, I almost said survivors, the rest of the casualties from the crash. Coach Ben, then makes a comment, and it's sort of like Jackie-esque in my opinion. He's like, well, at least then it will look like she just died with the rest of them. Makes me think of something Jackie would have said, like after Doom coming, 100%. So then we go back to the present, and adult Lottie is working with a group. Nat is watching, looking kind of unimpressed, but also a little curious. And then she turns, keeps walking, and she sees a cabin on the property with antlers mounted, and she looks shocked and also pissed. And I find her reaction super interesting, and a further clue that Lottie may be the antler queen that we see in the pilot. Fort girl, Lisa, then talks to her and confirms that's Lottie's cabin. So I find that very interesting. So as she's walking away, the camera zooms in on some bloody moss on a tree, which is interesting because there's an emphasis on moss in the very first episode of season 2. Like the moss that wasn't covered in snow at that tree that Nat and Travis saw, and then the moss growing inside the cabin. Why is there bloody moss? So then we go to Simone and adult Ty in the hospital, and Simone is not doing well after the crash. She appears to be in a coma or something. And Ty is half asleep, and she sort of dreams about talking to Simone, and Simone says something like, is this what you wanted? And then Ty wakes up, and the nurse is talking to her, and she's like, wow, what an interesting symbol you've drawn on her hand, meaning Simone's hand. And it is the rune that we see throughout the series. As soon as the nurse leaves, Ty convinces her, oh, it's just, for protection. And when the nurse leaves, Ty frantically erases it from Simone's hand, which I find so interesting because there's such a divide right now in the team timeline about whether the rune symbol is protective or whether it's dangerous. So it seems like Ty thinks it's dangerous, but I'm wondering why. What happened with it out in the wilderness? Meanwhile, Misty meets Walter at his houseboat at the dock, and we see indeed that the witness that Walter was talking about is Randy. So that's kind of funny. Misty, of course, scatters, but they agree to interrogate him with Misty in Walter's ear. Classic like police comedy type routine. So next, Shauna and Jeff are in a diner and they're talking, and Jeff really breaks my heart in this scene. He's like, oh, you know, I can't really blame you for cheating on me, not in those words, but it's kind of what he's saying, because I'm boring. And it's just really sad because it seems like that this is what happens when people are cheated on. They just really start to question themselves and question their self-worth and blame themselves for what the other partner did. And it's really sad to see. We're really seeing how Shauna's actions are affecting her daughter and her husband, and it doesn't seem to bother her that much, to be honest. She does say, well, it wasn't about you, it was about me. It was exciting. I felt like I liked, she says, it made me feel like I didn't know what was going to happen next. And this is so interesting because later on in the episode, which I'll get to, teen Shauna says something like that to Lottie, but very differently. She says, I'm scared, I feel out of control, like I don't know what's going to happen next. So like, same lines, but very different sort of meaning behind them. What is going to happen between Shauna being afraid of being out of control and liking not being in control? Super interesting. Also a really funny line in this scene where Jeff says, this is all my fault. Remember when you wanted to try that strawberry lube and I said no? I could have gone strawberry. It adds a little bit of lightness to a somber scene. So then as they're driving home, Jeff tries to be spontaneous and take a trip to Virginia to churn butter. It's so cute. Just like classic boring person wanting to do something fun. I feel so bad for him here. And as they're driving, they almost hit someone, and when they get out to check on him, it turns out that he was setting them up to hijack their car. And Shauna shoves him, gets the gun away from him, holds him at gunpoint, but Jeff tries to stop her, of course. And the thief gets away with their van. Jeff then says, what are you, Rambo? It's pretty fun. So next we have adult Lottie and adult Nat. Adult Lottie encourages Nat to sign up for a class, and she says, of course, no. And then Lottie takes her for a walk to look at the bees and talk about them. And she has this really interesting line. She says, when the queen bee hatches, she stings all the other unborn queens to death. Natalie then says, I can see why you like them. Like, obvious, must be a reference to what happens out in the wilderness, right? Something is going to happen with Lottie to make her dark and ruthless, I think. She then says, it's not brutal, it's natural. It's simply what needs to happen or the rest would starve. Like, wow. So then teen Nat is prepping the bones for transport. Lottie comes up to her, offers her the protective tea, and says, I'm just trying to protect you. Natalie says, I'm sure you are. And it's just so cool how like the teen timeline parallels the adult timeline, because Lottie is trying to help Natalie, presumably in the adult timeline, as she is in the teen timeline, and Nat is refusing her help. So pretty interesting. And then Travis offers to go with her to transport the bones. She says no, she'll be fine on her own. Then the camera goes to Shauna in the window. Lottie goes inside to talk to her. Shauna says, I'm scared. Everything feels out of control, like I don't know what's going to happen next. Lottie says, don't worry, you're not going to hurt the baby. We're all here to help you, and it's going to be a beautiful thing. So this to me feels like a clue as to what's going to happen to Wilderness Baby. I feel like the whole group is going to come together to protect him or her at all costs, and Shauna, and I think that's what's going to push them into like hunting, like cannibalism as a sport. I think their instinct is going to be to protect the baby, and they're going to do whatever it takes to provide for Shauna. Just an idea. Then Lottie suggests having a baby shower, and she says we should do something to welcome him. Shauna goes, what, him? I thought that the baby would be a girl after the end of episode 2, where she touches her belly and says she wants us to. But here it seems that Lottie thinks it's a boy, or maybe Lottie is talking about the dark presence out there. Because remember, in season 1, during the seance, she looks at Shauna and says, it's in you already. So maybe there's something dark about this Wilderness Baby. So in the present timeline, Walter is interrogating Randy with Misty in his ear. He almost lets it slip about Jeff and the blackmail, it seems. He's like, oh, what is this about? Why does the FBI want to talk to me? Is this about Jeff? And they're like, what? No, like we want to know about Natalie. And they just breeze right by it. But seriously, he could have let it slip right then that Jeff was the blackmailer. Back to the past timeline, the teens are getting ready for the baby shower. And Misty and Crystal, so Crystal encourages Misty to perform her gift. Akilah and Ty are talking, and Akilah says, I would do anything to see my nephew again. again, could be foreshadowing to what ends up happening with the group. She is just willing to do whatever it takes to survive. I think Akila will become a bigger character later on. We also hear Crystal and Misty talking about how Misty is upset that the rest of the group wouldn't make broth from Jackie's bones. And what's interesting, Crystal and Misty have this moment where they look at each other and they're like, it wasn't that bad, was it? They kind of liked cannibalizing Jackie. So I think that Crystal is really going to push Misty and encourage her towards cannibalism. Coach Ben walks in. He sees Jen frothing at the mouth, which is a still we saw from the trailer. And it seems clear to me that they are trying to show Jen as a wolf. So then we get another flashback to Paul and Ben. Ben obviously doesn't want to move in with him because he wants to go to nationals with the girls. And they end up breaking up. What's interesting is Paul is like, oh, you've always called the girls those vicious little monsters. Foreshadowing again. So Nat gets back to the plane with the bones, and she has this conversation with Jackie. She doesn't see her or anything. She's just talking to herself, really. It's not like Shauna and Jackie. She says, I'm sorry for what we did. You gave us one last reason to be jealous of you. You're lucky you're dead. I think shit's going to get a lot worse out here. And that line is just so ominous. So then she sees the white moose. She takes a shot at it, but she's unsuccessful and it gets away. I'm curious why they threw in the white moose. When I saw it in the preview, I thought for sure she'd be able to shoot it and they would have food. So I'm curious why it's there. Maybe they're able to hunt it down later. Maybe that is what they're chasing in the trailer when the whole group is charging something. That could be it. So back to the boat, Walter threatened Randy until he tells him the only odd thing he saw around the motel was a bunch of people in purple who drank all the Fanta from the vending machines. So they don't really think much of it, but of course we know this is a big clue. So back to the past timeline, Crystal is helping Misty practice her monologue, and we see Ty in her fugue state wakes up Van. Van follows her out. So Van is able to communicate with Fugue Tai, follows her out into the woods, and Fugue Tai tells her that she's following the man with no eyes. She also walks straight to a symbol on a tree and touches it, and then she wakes up from her fugue state. Van asks her questions, and Tai lies and says she doesn't know who the man with no eyes is. So Jeff is in the gym and he sees Kevin and he goes to talk to him, and I don't know what he was thinking, but he's like, you really upset my wife. What was that? Like, gives Kevin even more reason to suspect them than he already had. Shauna follows a tracking device to find her van. She goes into the chop shop, demands her van back, and at first the guy kind of dismisses her. So Shauna uses a tracking device to hunt down her minivan, and the guy kind of dismisses her at first, but she pulls a gun on him. She talks about peeling the skin off a human corpse. Super chilling scene, and makes me think like they have done some crazy stuff in the wilderness that we're going to see later. So Ben has one more flashback to time with Paul. Although we are clued in that this isn't actually a flashback, it's a fantasy sequence. He's telling him, oh, I decided to stay and I want to be with you. I want to live life as my true self. But we see in the background that on the news is playing that the plane has gone missing. So this is what could have been if he had chosen to stay with him. So I'm curious whether this is being shown to us because it's motivation for Coach to keep moving forward and living, or whether this is going to be his life flashing before his eyes and he's going to end up dying in the next episode. So the girls have their baby shower for Shauna. They all have these little gifts that they've made out of scraps, whatever they have. And Misty's gift is performing a scene or a monologue from Steel Magnolias. And in it, she puts emphasis on the line, I want to hit something, I want to hit it hard. And everyone stops like kind of laughing at her and they listen and they're sort of enraptured. It makes me think that everyone has this sort of like violence just bubbling underneath the surface after what happened with Jackie. So I'm really curious to see where that goes. While at the hospital, Ty has a really creepy interaction with her fugue self. She's looking in the mirror and she turns around, and then when she looks back, like her fugue self does not turn around. It keeps staring right at her, and she starts screaming, what do you want? So this is interesting because I didn't know that she could interact with her fugue self. Like, she's not aware of it at all in her teen timeline. So it's interesting that as an adult, she can speak to it, communicate with it. And so the fugue self mouths go to her, and she puts her hands up like this to kind of simulate Van's scars. So we're assuming that she's sending Ty after Van. And then we see as Ty is leaving the hospital, she tries to call Jessica Roberts. So I'm wondering if she's going to figure out what happened to her at this point, if she's going to know it was Misty or have a clue that it's Misty. I guess we'll find out. Then Misty and Walter have the idea to hack into the credit cards on the vending machine and find out who was using them to buy Fanta. So they plan to do that. Misty also realizes in this scene that Walter never had a mother going into a care home. He set that all up just to meet her. And she's like, why would you do all that just to meet me? Because remember, she's been used to being ostracized and no one valuing her. And he says, well, I'm just looking for the Sherlock to my Moriarty. So that's super interesting. Makes me think that Walter is going to end up being kind of an anti-hero in this upcoming season. So Shauna comes home, tucks Callie in with the stuffy that had been in the van. And Jeff says, how did the minivan get back here? And she just kind of looks like, so I'm curious if she's going to end up telling him how she got it back. Probably not after he freaked out about her being all Rambo earlier, but I guess we'll find out. Misty gets a text from Walter that he's figured out where the credit cards came from and asks if she wants to take a trip or a road trip with them to find the people, the purple people. So meanwhile, adult Lottie is having a group session. Nat is sitting in, and what's interesting is she's sitting there and she's wearing her normal clothes. Everyone else is in their purple, and she's got one purple item that's sort of like draped over her shoulders. So to me, that symbolizes that she's sort of dipping her toes into the Kool-Aid, but she's not 100% with it yet. She's just sort of like considering it at this point. She's warming up to it. So Lottie encourages Lisa, Fort Girl, to talk about how Nat's actions affected her. And oddly, she hands her a fork and she's like, if you feel like you want to hurt Natalie, I want you to do it. Obviously, Lisa doesn't. She ends up hugging Natalie. But that just like brings me back to the thought that the new Lottie adult Lottie has this darkness to her that we don't know everything about yet. At the baby shower, teen Lottie gives Shauna a baby blanket and it has this symbol, the rune, embroidered on it. And Natalie freaks out about this because she thinks it's a symbol of bad luck or something. And she's like, why the fuck would you put that on a baby blanket? We don't even know what it means. And it causes this division in the house. There's a few that side with or defend Lottie and a few that are on that side. I feel like this is foreshadowing to a split between these two, with the pragmatic group and then the more spiritual group. So on Lottie's side, there is Keela, Misty, and Mari, and then everyone else is on Nat's side, siding with her. As this is going on, Shauna suddenly gets a bloody nose. So a drop of blood falls from Shauna's nose onto the blanket and onto the symbol. And at that same time, a multitude of dead birds fall onto the cabin roof and outside of the cabin. They go outside and see them. Someone goes to touch them. I can't remember who, but Natalie says, don't touch them. They could be diseased. And Lottie says we should gather its blessings. And so that further symbolizes the division. So the same girls that were on Lottie's side during the argument over the symbol, they stay and they gather the birds, including Van. Van also helps gather the dead birds. Everyone else goes inside. So we can kind of see how these clans are shaping up already. The very, very end of the episode, the last scene is adult Lottie looking at the beehives that she showed Natalie at the beginning of the episode. And she sees that all the bees are dead and laying on top of the hives. And she reaches in and all of the combs are fully coated in blood. So pretty creepy, similar to the bloody moss at the beginning of the episode. And she's just looking at her hands covered in blood in shock and crying. And an acolyte comes up and says, "Il veut du sang," translates to "he wants blood." And she's like, what? And then it turns out it was just all in her head. There's no blood, there's nothing. So it could be a vision to something that's going to happen in the future, or it could be a flashback to something that happened in the wilderness. We don't know. So there have been a lot of complaints about the pacing of this episode. I personally thought it was a nice change from the last two. Nothing super crazy happened. And let's consider the title Digestif. I think that this one was put out there to be like a digestif. You're supposed to stop, consider everything, digest everything that has been presented so far, take a little breather, and there's going to be some crazy upcoming episodes. The cast has said that episode 6 is the craziest thing they've ever seen on TV, so I'm really looking forward to that. I think that one is titled It Chooses, so very curious about that. I'm also thinking of what the point was of the white moose. I'm wondering if that's going to be what they were chasing in the trailer when they all have like sticks sharpened, any weapon that they have, and they're just so desperate for food that they're trying to get this moose because it's the only game they've seen in forever. Also super curious about this split that's bound to happen between the two halves of the group of girls, and also curious about what's going to happen with Ben. Obviously, it could go either way. I kind of think he's going to pull through. So that's it for this week's episode. Really looking forward to next week, and see you in the next breakdown.